Now, for those out there who do not know me, I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I just don't subscribe to them. I think they're childish, foolish, and honestly, more times than not, people who lean in this direction tend to miss a lot of information to draw these conclusions. However, it's really hard to combat them today because Dallas Mavericks end up winning the lottery after they traded Luka Doncic just a couple of months ago in a draft class that features what many people are claiming to be the most complete prospect that we have seen since LeBron James. That's crazy. Now, for the people out there who've been living underneath a rock, on Monday night, the NBA had their draft lottery, and boy, oh boy, was it a night filled with drama. Teams moved up, teams moved down. Of course, a bunch of rumors circulating around several teams. Of course, the Dallas Mavericks find themselves with the #1 overall selection despite only having 1.8% chance of receiving said pick. I know it's crazy, and yet what's even crazier is that I don't even believe that that is the first or second most important story of the night. But before we get into all that drama, just quickly, let's talk about what exactly the results are, because there are also a lot of things to conclude from what exactly transpired. So for people out there who do not know, the first overall pick again goes to the Dallas Mavericks, second overall pick goes to the San Antonio Spurs, then the Philadelphia 76ers, Charlotte Hornets, Utah Jazz, Washington Wizards, New Orleans Pelicans. And then on the other side of the lottery, the 8th overall selection goes to the Brooklyn Nets, then Toronto Raptors, Houston Rockets, Portland Trail Blazers, Chicago Bulls, Atlanta Hawks, and again, the San Antonio Spurs wrap it up with the 14th overall selection. Now, the reason why I give you the results is because I'm pretty sure there's some people out there watching this video who aren't as tapped in as I am when it comes to the NBA, and are probably questioning, how did San Antonio receive 2 picks and why exactly the Kings or the Suns not being represented? Well, it's very simple. The reason why the San Antonio Spurs have 2 picks is because the 14th overall selection originally belonged to the Atlanta Hawks. The reason why the Spurs have that pick is because back in 2022, they traded DeJounte Murray to the Atlanta Hawks, and in return, they received said draft pick. Now, you may be wondering, well, if that is the case, then how exactly do the Hawks still have a lottery pick? Well, it's because that 13th overall selection originally belonged to the Sacramento Kings, because during the exact same offseason back in 2022, the Hawks decided to trade Kevin Huerter to the Sacramento Kings, and in return, they received their draft pick this year. Big old yikes if you're a Sacramento Kings fan. Moving on to the top 10 selection, we have the Houston Rockets. You may be wondering, hey, how is it possible that the Rockets had the second best record in the Western Conference and yet they still found themselves with a top 10 pick? Well, it's a bit more convoluted, but I'll be quick with it. Remember a couple years ago when the Brooklyn Nets were trying to build a big 3 with Kevin Durant, Kyrie, and James Harden? Well, the way they were able to get James Harden is because they traded him from Houston to Brooklyn, and in return, the Houston Rockets received some Brooklyn Nets draft capital. And then things imploded on themselves, so then the Brooklyn Nets had to trade everybody. They decided to trade KD to the Phoenix Suns, and in return, the Suns gave a bunch of their draft capital to the Brooklyn Nets. And then once that happened, the Brooklyn Nets started to realize, oh wait, we're tanking and we want to make sure we get our draft capital back. So literally just last offseason, the Brooklyn Nets traded the Phoenix Suns pick to the Houston Rockets, and in return, the Rockets sent over back their picks that they received during the James Harden trade initially to build out that big 3. And that's how the Houston Rockets received the Phoenix Suns pick, which is why they are represented with the 10th overall selection. But easily the biggest bullet that was dodged during this lottery was the fact that the Philadelphia 76ers found themselves with the 3rd overall selection, because if they fell outside of the top 6, which was really possible, that selection would have went to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And everybody in the NBA does not need to have OKC receive another lottery pick, which, as a sidebar, it's still in play. If I'm not mistaken, it just gets delayed to another season because it wasn't conveyed this year. But nevertheless, here we are with the outcome. Now, of course, the elephant in the room, and I'm pretty sure why you clicked on this video, is for me to explain to you, how is it not rigged that the Dallas Mavericks received the #1 overall pick? And yes, I must admit, it does come across as a bit coincidental, to say the least, that an organization that traded their franchise player in Luka Doncic in ways in which still does not make any sense to a major market with the Los Angeles Lakers, who admittedly, as a Laker fan, certainly felt like they were going to start floundering in the next year or two. So saving that organization, it definitely feels as if like they were rewarded with that sacrifice by receiving the #1 overall selection this year. And also, a part of this story that many people are not discussing is that looking back back at a lot of those Nico Harrison responses that he was giving to the media when they were asking him, hey, why would you make this type of a trade? His answer consistently was that this trade set us up not only for the now and the present, but also prepared us for the future. And in real time, that made absolutely no sense, because what is going to set you up for the future is a 26-year-old in Luka. Trading him for a 31-year-old in Anthony Davis does not set you up for the future, unless you know that down the line you're going to get the number 1 overall pick to get Cooper Flagg. And so yeah, that definitely seems a bit odd. However, I will say this, for people out there who are wondering the whole process on how all this happens, why exactly we don't get to see who exactly gets selected, you can. It's on the internet, on YouTube actually. It's very easily accessible if you want to watch the whole process on how exactly these teams get selected. So they're not really hiding anything. And also, I think a lot of people need to do their due diligence and really learn and understand how the odds have shifted over the past couple of years, in particular post the whole Embiid and Sixers process, how a lot of things have changed since then. But nevertheless, a 1.8% chance is still really, really low. And for them to pull that off, again, I can understand why people want to say that it's rigged, even though I don't believe that it is. But furthermore, I do find it a little bit more interesting about what exactly the Dallas Mavericks are going to do. News has already broke that the Dallas Mavericks intend on keeping their draft pick and selecting Cooper Flagg. So no, we don't have to anticipate Nico making another crazy trade. However, I have a lot of questions on exactly what is the fit for this team with Cooper, not only in the immediate future, but also long-term as well. Yes, I love the defensive identity that Nico has claimed that he's wanted to build out in Dallas for quite some time. You have Cooper Flagg, Derek Lively, Anthony Davis, all in the front court. You just need one more piece in the backcourt, potentially coming off the bench, because I even like Max Christie in the backcourt alongside Kyrie Irving. However, Cooper, as ready-made as he's going to be, I don't think he's going to have immediate impact. And next year, with Kyrie potentially out for the entire season, I do feel like that's going to be a lost year, which then only gives you 2 more years to try to compete at a high level with AD still on the roster. Because once his contract concludes, I have a hard time believing that AD, and Kyrie for that matter, is going to sign back long-term for a team that clearly is going to be moving in a direction to potentially rebuild around young players such as Lively, Max Christie, and now Cooper Flagg. And so when that happens, I just don't know what's going to be the next step, because for those who may have forgotten, this is the same organization that traded away a lot of draft capital to build the team to where they are right now when they still had Luka. And so in 2027, 28, 29, 2030, they do not have the rights to their own draft picks. So I don't know what exactly this team is going to look like long term with Cooper Flagg. And in my opinion, that is very, very concerning. But nevertheless, hey, shout out to my Dallas Mavericks fans out there. You actually have something to root for. I don't necessarily know how much you enjoy Cooper, and I definitely don't think it's going to, really aid that aching heart that you have now that Luka's gone. But hey, it's something. Something is definitely better than nothing. But in my opinion, that's not even the most important story here. There's like 3 more interesting pieces here, in large part because, again, I don't think that Dallas with Cooper is going to make as much noise as people initially believe that it's going to be. The first interesting talking point that I have to discuss is tanking is dead. In my opinion, it is way more interesting that Utah, Charlotte, and the Wizards, the teams with the 3 worst records in the NBA, none of them found themselves with a top 3 pick this year. Now, a lot of people are saying, see, this I know for a fact, irrefutably, it's all rigged. How is it that none of them end up with a top 3 pick? However, anyone who's been following the NBA pretty closely knows, thanks to the changes that they made in recent years, not only should this not be a surprise, but it actually means that the changes that they made are working exactly how they want. A huge problem that the NBA has faced for several decades now is tanking, effectively teams being incentivized to lose thanks to the way in which the lottery was set up. You had the Philadelphia 76ers really bastardize this ideology to the point in which it just became uncontrollable, and so Adam Silver came in and changed a lot of the odds in terms of who is favored for what pick in the NBA lottery. So much so that instead of teams having a much higher ceiling of receiving a top pick, instead what ends up happening is you end up raising your floor so you don't fall any lower than a certain selection. Now, what exactly do I mean by this? Well, if we actually look at the odds, for example, of the Utah Jazz, the team that actually had the worst record in the NBA, they only have a 14% chance to receive the first overall pick, which, as a sidebar, is the exact same percentage that both the Washington Wizards and the Charlotte Hornets had as well. To receive the second overall pick, you have a 13% 13.4% chance, and the third overall selection a 12.7% chance. However, the Jazz also had a 47.9% chance to be fifth, meaning that there is a 3 times more likelihood that the Utah Jazz, a team with the worst record in the NBA, end up with the 5th overall selection than the number 1 overall pick. But furthermore, it's actually more likely that the Utah Jazz were going to end up with the 5th overall selection than being in the top 3, because if you add together the 14%, the 13.4%, and the 12.7%, that only accumulates to a 40% likelihood to fall in the top 3, where again, you have a 47.9% likelihood to get the 5th overall selection. So again, when you have the information, it's not that surprising at all, and in my humble opinion, I actually believe this is a really great idea. I do not believe that teams should be rewarded by losing. And quite frankly, if you are a fan of a team that's trying to sell you on this idea of tanking, it is a BS excuse for them to get away with not being a competent organization. Because looking at the odds, you can clearly see there's just absolutely positively no way any team should be able to sell their fan base on this idea of tanking, when again, they are way more likely to fall in between 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th, in contrast to receiving a top 3 pick. And that's been happening pretty consistently ever since they changed the rules. So tanking is all the way dead. Another big takeaway from the night was the Philadelphia 76ers receiving the 3rd overall pick, because this organization needed some saving. Joel Embiid in that situation, really scary, because we're at a point in his career where you do not know what you're going to get next out of him. Similar things can be said about Paul George as well. To make matters worse, both of them received massive contract extensions, so they are locked into the team long term. Tyrese Maxey also signed a contract extension as well, and with 3 players receiving the amount of money that they are receiving, there is no financial wiggle room for this team to add any talent to their roster of significance. That's the big reason why Jared McCain last year, in addition that he brought to the team, was massive, because effectively you're talking about an organization that was able to bring in a starting caliber player on your roster on a rookie deal. And now they get to do that potentially again with the 3rd overall selection, where I do believe Ace Bailey is going to be available, give them a little bit more scoring punch they need on the wing, and potentially will be the insurance for when everything really falls off of the rails with both Paul George and Joel Embiid, and properly prepare themselves for a rebuild with Maxey, Jared McCain, and Ace Bailey. But the biggest takeaway out of everything, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it. I said it in my last video, I'm going to say it again. The San Antonio Spurs getting the 2nd overall pick might have actually been more dangerous than them getting the 1st overall selection, because there are several people claiming, oh man, what if the Spurs get the 1st overall pick and they get Cooper Flagg, and now you got a front court with Cooper and Wemby, and that right there looks like a very dynamic duo for years to come. And to be fair, that is true. That is certainly at play. And I actually would go as far as to say, if you are Nico and you need a little bit more draft capital down the line, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of trading down to the 2nd overall pick and just receiving not only the 2nd pick from the Spurs, but a conglomerate of draft capital that the Spurs can hand over as well. I think all of that is at play. But what also is now at play is, because the Spurs aren't necessarily pressured by doing the safe default thing by drafting Cooper Flagg with the 1st overall pick, it actually gives them even further incentive and more leverage to go after Giannis. I'm sorry to everybody, but that is my biggest concern. I don't know where everybody else's head is at right now, but the sheer possibility that Giannis and Wemby could be on the same team with one another, that's what keeps me up at night. That's what scares me. And if you are the Milwaukee Bucks, sure, there was a lot of, passive talk about, oh man, maybe Wemby and maybe Giannis pair together and we get a conglomerate of draft capital, maybe. But now, getting the 2nd overall pick in this year's draft class, potentially Stephon Castle, and even more draft capital, is irrefutably going to be the best package that you're going to receive for Giannis, in contrast to any other team that may be in pursuit of him during this offseason. And it's going to be really, really, really difficult to turn down the opportunity to have Harper on your roster with Stephon Castle and a bunch of other draft capital down the line, especially when you know for a fact you don't really have any answers to put anything around Giannis in the immediate future. and he only has 2 more years left on his deal. So even if Giannis isn't completely sold on the idea of him being traded, if I'm Milwaukee, I don't know what else I can do outside of put myself in a better position to do a rebuild with the 2nd overall pick in this year's draft class. The Spurs had a 6.3% chance of getting the 2nd overall pick. They had the 8th worst record in the NBA, and now they've immediately put themselves in a position to have all the leverage in the world with any Giannis conversation that they want to. But even if the Milwaukee Bucks decide to turn it all down, the Spurs, with Wemby, Stephon Castle, and a bunch of other draft capital, is about to get another top prospect. That's scary. But hey, that's just my thoughts. This is certainly ramping up to be one of the most interesting off seasons that we've seen in quite some time. And so make sure you don't miss any video that I drop on this channel. Hit the subscribe button, notification bell. And oh yes, if you want to see my reaction to the lottery, I uploaded it live on my other channel, The Lowlights, where I stream damn near daily over there. And I also do a bunch more ranting about Cooper Flag, how this whole lottery system works, why I don't think Cooper on the Mavericks is that big of a deal. Hell, why they should potentially even think about trading the pick, because I think that makes more sense than people are giving it credit to, and every other nonsense I like to talk and rant about when it comes to the NBA. Go check out that channel. But until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.